Vietnam was affirmed by a soggy crowd of some 15,000 Georgia students who sat through a 2-hour downpour to hear Secretary of State Rusk say peace would come when Hanoi wanted it. Outside, pickets who wanted it now demonstrated against the rally, and a 42-year-old Atlantan demonstrated against them by wrestling with a woman marcher and breaking her sign. He was charged with disorderly conduct and resisting arrest.
Everybody get out.
Secretary Rusk stood in the rain and replied to the pickets.
I saw a sign a few minutes ago which said, "Peace in Vietnam." They bring that sign to the wrong address. By the direction of the two great presidents whom I have been privileged to serve, I have been carrying that sign for 5 years in every capital of the world.
Georgia's Senator Richard Russell said the time for debate on Vietnam has now passed.
I can't overemphasize to you the importance that our government places on terminating successfully the operations in the South and our willingness to engage in unconditional discussions to that end. And I want to make it perfectly clear that the attacks of this morning are a part of our policy of exercising military restraint in the direction of our attacks in North Vietnam against military targets and those in particular which are the foundation of the campaign of aggression which the North is carrying out against the South.
Well, I feel that it's a larger dose of the same medicine that has already failed to cure the patient.
You cannot conduct the war this way without writing a sordid chapter in American history, and that's why I said on the floor of the Senate that symbolically every American flag everywhere in the world should be lowered to half-mast.
Well, I would just say that the burden is placed upon the administration to indicate that by the bombing that this is going to bring about an earlier end of the war.
Well, now at Haiphong, there are 550-odd thousand barrels of petroleum sitting on the surface there on a 140-acre tract of land. This should have been knocked out long ago. I'm glad that even though it's late, very late, this decision has come, and I'm sure that the American people will welcome this development.
I think I ought to distinguish between what might happen at Christmas and the idea of a general pause of the sort that came during the Christmas and New Year's season during January of this year. We have not been able to get indications from the other side as to what would happen if the bombing were stopped. We've tried almost literally every week since last January to get an answer to that question. And so I would not want to hold out the expectation that a prolonged pause in the bombing might occur. I think it would be for the South Vietnamese in the first instance, and to some extent depend on the Viet Cong as to what might happen during such special days as Christmas and the Tet period. But we'll have to see what happens on that. I don't have any hard information on either one of those subjects at the present time.
The president acted and looked energetic and fresh, except that his face appeared thinner. He stood through much of the news conference. No sound recordings were allowed, but later the president paraphrased some of his remarks.
We have known for several months now that the communists planned a massive winter-spring offensive. We have detailed information on Ho Chi Minh's order governing that offensive. Part of it is called a general uprising. We know the object was to overthrow the constitutional government in Saigon and to create a situation in which we and the Vietnamese would be willing to accept a communist-dominated coalition government. Another part of that offensive was planned as a massive attack across the frontiers of South Vietnam by North Vietnamese units. Well, we've already seen the general uprising, and you've been reading about it for days. The biggest fact is that the stated purposes of the general uprising, a military victory or a psychological victory, have failed. The communist leaders, according to their plans, had counted on great popular support in the cities for this uprising effort. They found little or none. On the other hand, there have been civilian casualties, and we know we've had disruption of a good many public services. In the meantime, we may at this very moment be on the eve, very close to, a major enemy offensive in the area of Khe Sanh and generally around the demilitarized zone. Now, I want to emphasize that we have, in the government, our military men have known for some time that this offensive was being planned by the enemy. And over the last several recent weeks, I've been in very close touch with General Westmoreland, and the last several days with the Joint Chiefs of Staff, to make absolutely sure that every single thing that General Westmoreland believed that was essential at this time was made available to him with speed and in amounts possible.
In this
there have been civilian casualties, and we know we've had disruption of a good many public services. And just before I prepared this statement, I had a long cable from Ambassador Bunker and General Westmoreland, which described the vigor with which the Vietnamese government and our own people in South Vietnam are now working to deal with the problems of restoring civilian services and complete order in all of the cities. In the meantime, we may at this very moment be on the eve, very close to, a major enemy offensive in the area of Khe Sanh and generally around the demilitarized zone.
Of this master plan we have seen unfold during the past several days. D-Day for this plan was set at 10, despite the fact that the communists had made quite a point that they would observe a ceasefire at 10. This was a deceitful and treacherous act by the enemy. The enemy has paid dearly.
Questions have been asked about the connection between the possibility of negotiations for a peaceful settlement in Vietnam and the military. In recent weeks, Hanoi knew that discussions of a peaceful settlement were being seriously explored. They also knew that there was a reduction of bombing attacks on North Vietnam, especially in the Hanoi and Haiphong areas during these explorations. Their reply was a major offensive through South Vietnam to bring the war to the civilian population in most of the cities of that country. Their preparations for a major offensive in the northern provinces of South Vietnam continue today unabated. In assessing, therefore, whether Hanoi's alleged interest in political talks has anything to do with making peace, one must take into full account the negative meaning of their recent escalation. The President declared in his State of the Union message that he would continue to explore the possibilities of negotiation and would report the results. I must report that all explorations to date have resulted in a rejection of the San Antonio formula.
all of the proposals made by the United States for peace in Southeast Asia continue to be valid. Specifically, the San Antonio formula put forward by President Johnson in September remains the basis of our position. We are not interested in propaganda gestures whose purpose is to mislead and confuse. We will be interested in a serious move toward peace when Hanoi comes to the conclusion that it is ready to move in that direction. Hanoi knows how to get in touch with us.